Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read along podcast. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
That is your host, Greg, who somehow still knows very little about the Wheel of Time, even though he usually pretends otherwise.
And that is Tylor, our resident expert, who makes sure you know how much he knows about the Wheel of Time.
It's a lot. Join us each week as we continue our journey through Robert Jordan's great fantasy epic, exploring the books, the television show, ill-advised discussions of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and so much more. Although actually not, it's just that.
Yes, all that and actually nothing else as we travel on, and I know what this means now, through the glass columns.
Yeah, he really doesn't know all that much.
No, you don't know that much.
Hi there. You've found your way back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read along Wheel of Time podcast, which you know from the credits that just finished playing. I, of course, am Greg, your host who knows seemingly less and less about the Wheel of Time and all of the related characters, locations, factions, and mythologies. And I am joined by Tylor, who somehow still invites me to come record this show with him, despite having to every week say, no, it's Carhane. It's Carhane, you dummy. Tylor, how's it going?
I'm doing good. It's Kyrian, if you were wondering. I have someone who wants to hang out and talk about the Wheel of Time. It does not matter how many mistakes you make. This is a positive thing in my life. I was just thinking the other day, about like 5 years from now, someday this podcast is going to end, and on like Sunday nights, I'm just going to wonder what you are doing, and it will be really weird. We don't have that problem for quite some time, because right now we are in the middle of a pretty good book that is taking a little break. I don't know how much we're going to have to say this week. What were your thoughts on To Boannda?
To Boannda, which of course is chapter 49, and I think we should throw that in. My thinking is always like there's somebody who forgets and like clicks the wrong episode or something. So there you go. It's chapter 49, To Boannda, which I already knew how to pronounce and didn't ask Tylor before we started. So I would agree with you. As I was reading this one, so my reading this time was not distracted, but it was in the lobby of swim class, because I dropped the kid off at swim class and sat in the lobby of the YMCA. And as I was reading this, I'm like, this is a lot of plot. Like, this is plotty. Like, plot. Here's some people, here's some things. And then there's a little spike of kind of intrigue and interest and character development, I thought. But I was like, left this being like, so the boat went down the river, right? That's what we got.
That is exactly right. I'm trying to Google. I apologize if you can hear my
I was
keyboard
gonna
going.
say, usually we don't hear that. That was like beautiful Foley of like Greg's talking. Go on.
My apologies. There is a fantasy book that I read maybe like a decade ago that I am struggling to place. So please hit us on Instagram if you remember what this book is called. It is a trilogy. The first book is called To the End of the World or From the End of the World or something like that. And the entire book takes place from 7 characters going from their hometown to a random city that's about halfway to where they intend to go. The entire book is just travel, and it is my single least favorite fantasy novel I have ever read. At the end of the book, they're like, we finally made it halfway, and I threw it on the ground and refused to buy the second book. And this chapter felt like that entire book, right? There is nothing wrong with saying, here is what is going on for our characters. Let's kind of get you caught up on them. But to do just that and very little else is rough. And to do just that and Nynaeve's No One Else Matters But Me shtick, woof. I had a rough time with this week's reading. And apparently I don't even remember the name of the book that I tried to criticize here. I guess I'm just getting at, this is a very odd thing. This is not an odd thing for Robert Jordan in general. It is a very odd thing for Robert Jordan with, 150 pages to go or so, maybe 200? Where are you at with this? I know before you have said this might be kind of a slow down book instead of a push everything forward book. Is that putting you off of the series? Is it an issue? Where are you kind of feeling now with 4 weeks left after we finish this?
Well, and it's interesting because it feels like it is purposefully breaking the model. And I don't know that that was necessarily a bad thing, because we'd gotten a little too comfortable with those rhythms. And we're often in places about midway through the book where it was like, come on, let's get going. Let's get over the top of the hill on this roller coaster and push forward. But I do feel like this change has made this feel unfulfilling so far. And it's not that nothing has happened in this book, because we get a reminder this chapter that a whole big battle happened, and it was important, and it, you know, changed a lot of what's going on this continent. But it's starting to feel like, again, and I've said this in recent weeks, that we are now, I'm not a marathon runner, but let's pretend I am. When you see them start a marathon, there's like that initial crunch where all 200 people are like right jammed up together, and a few people like really push to get out of there. And then they settle into the kind of comfortable running pace where maybe they're pushing each other a little bit, but you're kind of just trying to get from, let's say, mile 5 to 20, just kind of at a steady survive this rhythm. And so I am reading this kind of whole novel as that moment where you're like, okay, the first 4 books broke us out from the pack. There's now the little group of leaders. Let's find a comfortable pace that makes it so we are the contenders, and we're just going to keep kind of starting this long marathon. And so to say it without the twisted marathon, of which is built on no kind of expertise whatsoever, I actually often tell my students, like, if you asked me to run a marathon, like this second, you would find me a mile down the road, dead in the gutter, somehow with a Big Mac in my hand, and I wouldn't have passed by a McDonald's, but I would somehow have had one. And so I would say I'm finding that this just feels like a lot of setup for the long haul. And, you know, there are parts of me that are frustrated by that, but also, as I think I said back in like our pre-book 1 episode, I'm not somebody who's lived in a book series this long, at least this many pages, I'll say. You know, I did do, actually, since we've been recording, I did the whole Patrick O'Brian, which is 20 and a half books. He didn't finish the last one. So it's a longer number of books, but I think we're like close to the page count already, if not that far from it. So I think I'm feeling like it's not what I expected. It's not particularly exciting, but I trust that it is gonna kind of pay off as we move into the next phase.
You know what else is going to pay off? The 5+ minutes of summary that I am about to do. This will not be a short one. Any last thoughts before you probably like go get a coffee and come back when I'm done?
No, but I will. So I think we've said this before. When it's the harsh, cold winter months, which it is as we record this episode, I am down in my cold, unfinished basement, and so I have a winter hat on, and I do have a steaming mug of coffee and a space heater. So I'm just going to get cozy and kind of chill while you summarize chapter 49 to Boannda.
Nynaeve manages to bully the captain with an assist from the Shienaran sharpening their swords, and she pays him for the passage for all of the refugees, and as she does, Elayne teases her about how much money she is spending. The crowd surround Nynaeve with thanks, and the ship departs. The captain gives them his quarters, but Elayne says that he is hiding something. The cabin is awful, and Elayne quickly deduces that what the captain is hiding is that he is a smuggler. She seems upset about this, but Nynaeve doesn't care. Nynaeve thinks that Elaine's lawful streak makes her very much like Galad, but Elayne refuses to see it. They note that room is scarce on the ship, but Elayne manages to eventually threaten the captain with tariff enforcement and Tom with a knife flourish until the captain eventually unloads his cargo, clearly very upset about it. The captain, named Neres, hates women on his ship but has a family back in Ibu Dar, and the girls avoid being overbearing, and Nynaeve thinks that Elayne and Birgitte are avoiding needling her to avoid confirming any of his suspicions about women. Nynaeve is excited excited that they are making good time until she realizes that Elayne channeled to create favorable wind conditions, and Nynaeve worries that Moghedien may have detected it even all the way back in Samara, and Nynaeve says that Elayne should have asked her, and then Birgitte tells them that they are both behaving unacceptably and they separate. All of their animosity towards one another fades over the next few days, however, as the trip goes on, and Nynaeve's kind of commentary about all of this lacks any awareness that she is causing problems, only that Elayne and Birgitte are. Nynaeve heals the refugees, both traditionally and using the power, and she eventually heals Uno and then the rest of the passengers as well. Birgitte and Elayne help with the children, and Elayne starts studying the Adam again, and they start to give the refugees kind of small donations here and there, and Nynaeve thinks that it is wasteful when Elayne does it, but very helpful when she does. And then we get to hear a little bit of the stories from a number of the people. 3 of the women stand out to Nynaeve. One of them is Nicola, about her age, and apparently lost her betrothed in service of the prophet and now wants to get away from him. The second is Marigan, who is a bit older with 2 children and wants to heal, but was chased out of town by a mob thinking she could channel. And finally was Areina, who wanted to go to Ilion to find her brother, but ended up taking the hunter's oath, and things have gone very, very badly since then, but she still wants to continue adventuring. Nynaeve accidentally reveals to Birgitte that Elayne is a royal, and Birgitte silently walks away and stares off into the middle distance. Eventually there is an animated conversation between Elayne and Birgitte that Nynaeve doesn't overhear. Elayne seems perturbed, but all of the tension between those two immediately seems to evaporate. Birgitte resumes using her own name, and the girls stop dyeing their hair, and after 3 days they arrive in Boannda, causing significant questions about why the river serpent would have docked in Samara at all. All of the answers to those are the captain is definitely a smuggler. The refugees unload there, but the 3 women discussed above all decide to stay on the ship with the girls. Nereus is incredulous when they are told that they are bound for Saladar, but eventually he agrees to take them there, and Nynaeve channels to pinch him in retaliation for all of his sexism, and then she uses the ring ter'angreal the next night to enter Teleron Riod. She is terrified when she gets to the heart of the stone, calling out for Egwene, and when she doesn't show, Nynaeve flees, and then eventually sobs to Elayne, saying that she is a coward. Birgitte says they can run forever, or they can set a trap for Moghedien and actually do something, and Elayne says they will go back to Teleron Riod together so that Nynaeve can face her fear. They go to Camelin and then to Emon Field, and Nynaeve marvels at the changes in the 2 rivers, particularly noting the banners of both the Nethrin and the Red Wolf that we know is Perrin's banner. They go to the tower eventually, but they find little news that seems notable, other than the note that Elaida is especially angry. Elayne says the palace, as they were walking through it, felt especially empty, and Nynaeve feels accomplished at facing her fear. Eventually, they start going back to Teleron Riod every night, and what they learn in the tower are a few things: that an emissary has been sent to Saladar, but with demands rather than concessions, that Elaida is searching for Davram Bashir, that there is a ban on discussing Mazrim Taim, and that borderlanders object to meddling by the White Tower. The girls are unable to contact Egwene, but they do figure out how they can hold someone in Teleron Riod against their will, and apparently it takes Nynaeve days to learn the technique, even though Elayne discovers it relatively quickly. They learn to create objects in the dream, and they accidentally at one point create a unicorn, and then they realize they cannot channel in Teleron Riod if they use the disc ter'angreal that they have been using, and Elayne wants to understand why so that she can fix it, but they are unable to figure out what is going on. At this point, they exit the dream, and there is a brief conversation about whether or not it was right to make Nereus get rid of his cargo. They then go back into Teleron Riod to meet Egwene and the Wise Ones, and Nynaeve is using the lesser ter'angreal that doesn't allow her to channel. Everything looks right to her, but Elayne says that she seems misty, and Amos is surprised that they are both there and questions Nynaeve's appearance. Nynaeve is about to mention seeing Egwene in her dreams when Egwene cuts her off with the news that they already know because Egwene already told them. Amos says that Rand is well, but pushes himself too hard, and at this point Egwene and Amos tell of Rand's 4 hours per day of training, as well as the fact that he has created a school that he is inviting people to attend, and Amos worries that Rand has forgotten the Shido entirely as they have run off to the north, and he has already sent half of the Aiel to Tyr in the south. No one entirely knows why he is sending them in that direction. Nynaeve starts to ask questions about when and Egwene again tries to change the subject, giving a non sequitur about a study in Tar Valon, and then asks after their adventures. They tell what they can, omitting Birgitte, even though Egwene already knows most of those details, and Elayne insists that the Aes Sedai and Saladar are going to support Rand, And Egwene says that she will tell Rand about Mazima and what the Prophet is doing. Amos inspects the Terangriel that Nynaeve is using and says that she is likely less here than the others. At this point, they shift into the White Tower, and they meet Egwene in Sheriam's study, and Egwene basically chews them out for almost revealing that she visited them in their dreams, and Nynaeve actually seems somewhat admonished about it. In fact, she gets so embarrassed that she is no longer angry, and she can no longer channel, and wakes up. Nynaeve is upset and seems to blame everyone but herself, but after a few moments, Elayne wakes up saying the only news they were able to learn in the dream is that Shemmarin was apparently reduced to accepted, something that neither of them thought was possible for an Aes Sedai to essentially be demoted. At this point, Elayne says that she wants to send a message to Aviendha and Rand, and Elayne kind of needles at Nynaeve that she has just as unresolved a relationship with Lan as she does with Rand. At this point, they get ready to disembark, and Elayne gives Nerys a valuable necklace to pay for the cost of the cargo that she says she shouldn't really have made him get rid of. Eventually, they realize that they don't know how they will be received in Saladar, but they go over all of their accomplishments in the past year or so, and they think that they are likely to be received as heroes, and at this point, Uno begins to clear them a path, and they think it will be several hours until they arrive in the village. Boy, did I say a lot there. What did you take out of it while I drink all of the water? You are still muted.
They got down the river, and that's it. So, I guess I'll frame my comments through this idea we've talked about before, which is, where is rock bottom for Nynaeve? That it felt like she had reached rock bottom previously, as we continue to see her struggle basically to fit any defined role that she has put in, and yet has the self-awareness to make that feel really harmful, right? Like it's she feels it instead of being kind of blissfully ignorant to the fact. And so I felt like this was a notch lower, and yet maybe perhaps a little more healing, because the old cliche from therapy, you have to name the problem before you can address the problem. Yeah. And her admitting her own cowardice in kind of that weak moment with Elayne, to me, felt like the moment of the chapter, that this was, okay, this is rock bottom, but she is willing to start to build herself back up. And so I liked that moment. You referenced all these people before that, and I basically skimmed through those paragraphs being like, come on, I don't have time for more names. I can't care about these people. I have no brain space left for these people. And then they do depart, so it felt like, okay, see you in 4 books when I will need to be reminded by Tylor who these people are.
Yeah, that's absolutely valid. I want to start with Nynaeve, because I think her kind of character arc of this chapter is kind of the through line that keeps me coming back when, as you say, it really does kind of feel like just a list of things and a list of names. I don't know why today is the episode where I just diss books that everyone else really likes, but 100 Years of Solitude, that's what this chapter read like. Just like, here is a description of a thing that happened, and then here is the next thing that happened, and then here is the next thing that happened. And I really kind of need a little more thoughtful description of what is going on in characters' heads when this is happening for me to really latch on to it. And the closest we get to that from Nynaeve in this chapter is her repeatedly blaming all of her problems on everyone else on the boat. And that just wears thin on me throughout this chapter. I think this is a case of Robert Jordan not necessarily doing a bad thing in terms of the plotting of the chapter, but if this were from Elaine's POV, or like, man, a Tom or Birgitte POV would be incredible right now. I think Nynaeve is really kind of wearing as the narrator, especially in a chapter that's so plot heavy, because she is the character maybe more than any other who has 5 emotions and just runs through them on a cycle.
Yeah, in your description and in the chapter, it kind of presents her as this lawful character who only kind of sets those firm lines, right? I have that correct.
Elayne is kind of more the lawful kind of legally, but I would say Nynaeve is very much about, like, here are kind of the rules that I follow, and everyone should follow them the way I do.
Yeah, well, which is a fight my wife and I have frequently, because I will judge every human on Earth that we encounter, and my wife productively says, just because they don't do it your way does not mean that they are wrong, right? And I, of course, explain that actually that does mean they're wrong.
Yeah.
But it is kind of that kind of attitude I feel like that we're getting from Nynaeve, that Nynaeve is like, no, I know how things should be done. And again, I have a lot of sympathy for her because she comes from a big fish, small pond situation where she did hold the power to say this is how things should be done and people listened. Yeah. And now to be so powerless and then feel yourself so limited is tough.
Well, and I think that this chapter does a really good job of highlighting how Nynaeve can simultaneously be so powerful and so powerless at exactly the same time, right? This is a chapter where she absolutely dominates Neres, a relatively powerful character, right? She gets all the refugees on the boat. She negotiates a reasonable payment. She will take no guff. Every time that something goes wrong in this chapter, Nynaeve fixes it, right? She is extremely capable. And yet there are just, like you said, there's this wonderful scene of her kind of breaking down when she realizes how afraid she is to go to Tylor on Riode. Or the moment that really stood out to me was when she just felt so kind of cowed by Egwene's tirade about her giving away the information about Egwene visiting their dreams. It felt like this was a chapter where Nynaeve kind of received criticism better than before, but in order to show that she still needed that criticism, we had to have a bunch of really annoying Nynaeve moments to get there. Is that kind of your read as well?
Yeah, I think so. And all I want to say is when we are in her head, it's almost like all of that becomes fuzzier. And I think that's actually good because we don't recognize our own faults as much as we recognize faults in other people. So it's like it works narratively and it works for the character, but it also is like it makes it that much harder to be like, what exactly are we supposed to understand from these interactions and so on. But that idea that she's kind of finally maybe listening did come through, that the lessons are hitting instead of just being ignored.
I am hoping that we don't need to, for the 8th straight The Girls chapter, discuss the cattiness that Robert Jordan wants to put in every single chapter, even though it seemingly resolves at the end of every single chapter. I kind of want to jump forward to what apparently you skipped, which is we have 3 new names. All of them get reasonable amounts of description, and they all stick around with our characters when all of the other refugees go away. And especially when all of our characters are now like, oh, I can channel. It's no big deal. Moghedien is all the way back down the river. I'm kind of feeling the same way about these 3 new women that you were feeling about the acrobat or the jugglers maybe, 5-6 chapters ago. You were like, oh, if someone new shows up at this point, who are they? Are they one of the Black Aja? Are they Moghedien? When I see 3 new characters show up, I'm like, one of these has to be a terrible something, and I'm curious which one it is. So were you playing that same game, or were you just like, whatever, new names, there's only 100 pages left?
More the latter, but I find the first part compelling, and that is... That is true. I mean, there was definitely a feeling across the chapter of, they let their guard down. That's when the killer comes back in with a knife, right? In classic slasher movie or some such. So I do have that sense of foreboding, especially, metagaming a little bit because we're not 10 pages from the end. We're 150 pages from the end or so. So it feels like whether we stay in this plot line or not, there's room for a little more, although they do kind of land at this moment where I didn't look at the next chapter, but it's like if it was just, and they started hacking through the jungle to where they needed to be, that could also be a believable landing place for this book.
Yeah, I mean, no, and that's the interesting thing, right? We are in a very odd place now where Rand has very clearly had what feels like the big climax of his plot line. And so kind of the lingering question for me is the 3 kind of big plots in this book have been Rand and Co. in Cairhien. We've had the girls making their way through Samara and the surrounding area. And we had Min as well as Siwan and the others kind of making their way to Saladar. And so my kind of question, and I'm kind of lingering here, is just where do we go for the last 10 chapters of this book or so, right? We've got a little ways left to go. And it feels like like you said, I think we've kind of got what could very well be and we are done with Rand moment. This feels like a we could be done with the girls moment. And I'm kind of not sure where we're going to spend that last section of the book. Any inclination on that before I make you start talking about Birgitte's hilarious reaction to finding out Elayne is a princess?
I will just say I agree with everything you just said, of course, or else I'd be kicked off this show. But I do feel like while all this is true, it does feel a little 9th episode-y, and where's that 10th episode? And I won't butcher that analogy again because I've talked it through enough different episodes, but it does feel like if the book is settling into that pace of let's start the marathon, then this needs to not just be like, here's a satisfying landing place for everybody. It needs to preview what's coming next. In other words, it needs to start making you really want to buy the next book. So my guess would be that we are kind of done the conflicts of this book, but we're going to get a clear sense of what the next book's big bad is, right? I don't know there'll be like a spectacular cliffhanger, but we will get enough of a sense. Oh, there's rumors from that city over there that this guy is now trouble, and everybody will be like, we should go to that city and see what that guy's trouble is doing, and then that's where we'll leave them.
You literally looked at the table of contents and saw that there's a chapter called News Come to Kyrian in like 4 chapters, didn't you?
I did not, or at least did not remember that. So, but yeah, it kind of feels like it's like let's set up whatever the next conflict will be.
Totally.
And like that is also kind of looking at where we are in a series where, I think the middle books in a very long series are the troublesome ones where it's like this is where people will bail, especially if they've been reading them as they come out. We have this advantage of the next book is always right there, but you need to make sure that if somebody finished The Fires of Heaven and had to wait 9 months, 10 months to get the next book, that they're going out on day one to pick up that book. And I say this in the context of we just saw Brandon Sanderson launch that new book last month where everybody's like, oh, thank God, book 6, like we got to do this, or book 5, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so I do think that spirit feels necessary in this part of a series like this.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, and there is nothing that gets me more excited about the next book than Birgitte being hilarious. She has some really great moments in this chapter, and I once again have just the feeling that Birgitte is just the adult in the room, right? It's worth remembering Elayne probably just turned 18 or 19 relatively recently. Like, Nynaeve is 21 or 22, and Birgitte is 600. And boy, is it wonderful to have a character who is just like, you need to stop being a jerk, and you need to stop being a jerk, and I need to stop being a jerk. And her reaction to Elayne being a princess was hysterical to me. Just like dead eye straight ahead, silently walk out of the room, and then clearly have a conversation with Elayne where she was like, I don't care that you're a princess. You're not the boss of me. And that's awesome.
Well, and that is Elayne's heritage continued to be a theme in this, because then they see the giant halls, and Nynaeve gives some sympathy, like, how could I expect Elayne to understand what the world is like when this is where she was raised? But I really like the like, let me respect and show a little sympathy, but also hold you accountable, right? And I think we got both this chapter. It's like, just because we understand why you are the way you are doesn't mean we're going to put up with you being the way you are.
Yeah, I really like that Birgitte's position in this book has largely been like, yes, Nynaeve, you are correct. Now be better. And we just all need a friend who is willing to say that. There is kind of an interesting through line in this chapter that I'm going to introduce now, even though it kind of comes from now until the end of the chapter, of this debate about Nerys the captain and what it means that he is a smuggler and how much the girls should or should not be interfering with him in his business, right? They force him to take on the refugees. No one seems upset about that. To make room, they make him throw away his cargo. That seems to be what really spawns the big debate. At the beginning of the chapter, Elayne is on the laws need to be followed side, and Nynaeve is on the you do what is right for people side. And by the end, it seems that Elayne is like, I did the right thing still, but I should compensate Nerys for it. And I'll be honest, I'm mostly bringing this up because I used to teach economics, and this sounds very much like the kind of thing that we would talk about in one of my classes with like resource management or something. I'm curious whether you got anything out of this. For me, it was just really helpful to kind of remind myself where Elayne and Nynaeve live on like the Dungeons and Dragons alignment chart. Like, I don't really think of Nynaeve as being even like chaotic, really, but she's very clearly not the type of lawful that Elayne is.
Well, since you brought it up, I just want to note that the recent developments on the Star Wars Skeleton Crew television show had me asking economic questions, and I got accused on a text message thread of like, Tylor, put down Greg's phone. Like, we know it's you, which made me laugh a lot. So what I think of that moment is that this feels like the same kind of debate that's been happening in Rand's plot line, that Rand is trying to be a better leader. And we're not necessarily calling it leadership here, but I think it's that same question of how do you lead people, right? Do you, make sure they're taken care of, or do you make sure they're doing the right thing? And it may be right to let the Aiel steal everything from those people. Like, maybe those people deserve it, but that's not going to win the hearts and minds. And I think that lesson here for Elayne is, okay, I maybe have to uphold the law, but I also have to win the hearts and minds, right? Yeah. And it's interesting that the two people seemingly learning those lessons are both destined to lead the entire like continent at some point, or a large swath of it. And I don't know, in some ways that would make it seem like this is just an early seed for like an ending where they both are married and reigning over all of the kingdom with a united vision of how to lead. But I am more and more feeling like that is not a pairing that is going to last. And maybe it's that the pairing was literally broken in a snowy igloo, or maybe it's just that it seems like they're hanging too much on it for it to be lasting.
Well, and I actually thought that the discussion that Elayne and Nynaeve have about their respective relationships is really interesting in light of what you just described, right? Because Elayne kind of thinks to herself, I need to get in touch with Avienda and see how things are going. I need to get in touch with Rand and make sure that he's aware that I'm still kind of like keeping a place for him. And the response that Elayne kind of gives when Nynaeve kind of questions any of this is basically like, well, where are you at with Lan? And so I think kind of putting that idea in the context of, you're right to say these are two characters who need to be learning about leadership because the kind of rosy colored glasses tells us they are going to be in charge of a big swath of land. But there's also a part of me that goes like, ooh, these are characters who are still very young and it seems like are still kind of uncertain romantically, and I'm not sure how much Robert Jordan wants to be telling a story where everyone ends up with the person who they met in the first book. And so I'm just kind of, we've been in holding patterns with these romances for so long. It sounds wrong for me to be saying this, but I just want the romance to start moving forward a little bit, Robert Jordan.
Just because I know my co-host, I want to say it is the big debate in the Bluey fandom right now, right? So
yep.
So Bluey is about what, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old dog?
Yes.
And it was recently revealed in a flash forward that she is married and has a kid, but like eventually marries and has a kid, not at age 6. And like the entire Bluey fandom was like, well, we have to figure out which person, from the show she is now married to. And of course, who met their spouse prior to when they were 6 years old, right?
Yeah. This is my response. I'm like, no, on any children's television program, if the question is which of those two kids are they going to marry, the answer is the one they meet in college.
So it does feel like that we are asking all of these 18-year-olds to have initially coupled with the one person they will be with forever. And I recognize that me saying these lessons is a little ironic because I actually did marry my first girlfriend ever, who I met when I was 18. But at the same time, it's a 1 in a million. So I think I find myself believing a little bit more in Nynaeve and Lan, because especially Lan is a little older and is making kind of more rational decisions, even though what is love but irrational decisions. So, boy, that was so poetic. Did you just shed a little tear? I think you did.
I mostly just got mad that you said the words "what is love" and didn't follow it up with "baby, don't hurt me." Like, that's a problem.
That's what the tear was for. Okay. Yeah. And so I believe a little bit more in that pairing. The rest of these don't seem like they're going to last. And it's interesting because there was a time when I was like, Egwene and Rand forever. And then it's like, that doesn't even cross my mind anymore. And I wonder how long till Elayne and Rand feels like that.
I have nothing else to say about the romance other than if you want more romance in your life, Nobody Wants This was really, really good. Watch that television show. You mentioned earlier the moment where Nynaeve goes into Teleron-Riode, is terrified, and then kind of breaks down, and Elayne says, let's go together and kind of face this fear. I loved that moment. I don't have much to say about it other than talk to your friends when you're feeling down. They'll make you feel better. It's the right move every time. What did you have to say about that moment? And if the answer is you've already kind of covered it, I'm curious what you pulled out from the girls investigate in Teleron-Riode section, because there's a bunch of little details that you could kind of pull out and be interested in. What stood out to you in the dreamy section of this chapter?
Big I can't carry it for you, Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you vibes, which is probably my favorite moment in Lord of the Rings. Great scene, great, a character admitting their fault, but particularly when that fault is cowardice, just always rings true for me, because that's probably, in my mind, the hardest thing it is to admit. So flashing around, it felt notable most of all to me that so much felt empty, but this was particularly, correct me if I'm wrong, this is particularly Two Rivers and the palace in Andor, right?
Yes, I think that the palace was the one that was specifically commented on. The interesting thing is that I think both of the comments about things feeling empty were by whoever was using the disc ter'angreal. So it may also have been that they weren't kind of fully in the dream. But that's a really good point. That kind of feeling of emptiness when in the past we've had Teleron-Riode kind of feel like there's always eyes on the back of your head. That I think is really notable.
Well, and so the one I was more interested in would be Two Rivers. And as I understand it, we are meant to see that there was the kind of tower with the two flags, right?
Yeah.
And there's a giant house being built there. Did I make that up?
No, that is correct. There is a 3-story, what kind of seemed like the description of, if not a palace, at least like a mansion kind of house is being constructed. We had heard nothing of the sort the last time that we were in the Two Rivers. So interesting to figure out what's going to be going on there next book.
Yeah, I mean, what it seems like the natural candidate is like, okay, Perrin is building his own like bridal palace or wedding, what do you call it? Like, where he's going to carry his bride over the threshold into their new home. And yet that feels so out of character for Perrin. It made me, and I had kind of assumed they were off visiting her family. So I wonder if like everybody who loves him so much now is building this for him. It's like their gift and raising him up. But it seems like, what do they say in New Zealand? The short poppy syndrome, the tall poppies get cut, right? Sure. You don't know this? No. So in like New Zealand, I think it's New Zealand and Australia, there's this idea that if you stand out, you're just going to get cut down. So you want to be a short poppy in the mix. And so it feels like the higher they raise up Perrin out of genuine admiration, the more of a target they put on him for enemies, but seemingly also allies, right? Because having a very powerful king come out of that region is not on anybody's like wish list.
Yeah, no, I think the fact that both Nynaeve and Elayne note the flags is really important because Elayne, theoretically, is the one who would object to someone else raising a flag in what is technically her kingdom. You also mentioned that you thought that Perrin and Faile would be going to see her family. Her family gets a shout-out in this chapter, right? When we learn the information from the tower, it feels very much like, flash forwards of things we'll see in a book or two, but there is an emissary being sent to Saladar are. Elida is searching for Davram Bashir, which is Fail's father, and it turns out that the Borderlanders are upset with how much meddling is going on. These all feel like things that will come up later, and then the girls summon a unicorn. So you can either talk about the important stuff or the silly stuff, but you do need to talk about one of those two things in the dream.
Well, and maybe this is just my hunger for more and different plot lines. I mean, I'm starting to miss Perrin and Fail, but that got me excited. I'm like, okay, let's go to that region and let's learn what that is next. Maybe one of them is a Lord of Chaos. We shall see.
It is distinctly possible. I know who the Lord of Chaos is. You don't. Ha ha ha. I guess then what we've got is unicorns and then Egwene and Amos. And boy, is this a lot of kind of catching up on things that one side knows and the other doesn't. I didn't really pull a ton of, like, here are the things you must learn about, but the fact that everyone seems to be kind of getting worried about Rand. At the beginning of this book, when Elayne asked, how is Rand? The answer was, he is as well as can be expected. Now it is, he's running himself ragged. That worries me a little bit.
I don't have much to add on this section, but before it has felt like there's a lot of conflict and tension. And I think as a part of what you are saying, it feels like, okay, we're all on the same page here. Like, I think probably Amos still has reservations about the way they're using Teleron Rio kind of so casually, especially if she knew how much they were doing there. Yeah. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like there's as much conflict in this group. Like, if they were somehow to run into each other next chapter, I think it would be like pretty copacetic. Like, yeah, okay, let's just take care of Rand, or let's figure out what we're gonna do when this goes south.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Couple just really, really tiny notes, but ones that I just want to get on people's minds if we're talking about things. The Shido running off is very interesting to me. I want to know where they're at. In particular, Amos also notes that there are still Aiel from across in the waste who are kind of trickling across the spine of the world and joining the Shido. That kind of implies that that group is getting bigger, not smaller. Makes me wonder where it's going to end up.
And headed north, right?
That's correct. Yeah, headed north. And then kind of the counter to that is Rand is sending half of the Aiel to the south to Tyr. That also starts to raise questions. That is near Ilion, so we can at least maybe start to guess what the idea is there. But both of those two things kind of stood out. And then this new idea that Rand has founded a school and invited scholars to attend it immediately makes me go like, whoa, that is brand new and nothing that Rand has even thought about leading up to this. Are any of these kind of updates from Cairhien enough to get you pumped about this section, or is it just kind of, yeah, I'll find out about this when we get there?
Well, clarify for me, Rand is not headed south that we know of.
Correct. He is sending his forces south, but he seems to be, for the moment, staying in Cairhien.
And we believe as a part of this, he does need to eventually go reclaim the sword that he stabbed in the ground, or he does not?
At some point in the future, probably yes. I think the last time that we had kind of mention of the Sword of Tyr, there was a line of prophecy about like the one who follows after to take the sword. And so it's not clear whether Rand will go back for it or someone else will, but it definitely is the case that he will need Kalendor at some point before the last battle.
And then the piece about the school, if this were an HBO show, I'd be like, oh, come on, we don't need a spinoff. We don't need From the World of Wheel of Time, because it has that kind of feel. Like you said, yeah. It's totally different. It's Dwight Schrute suddenly has a problem on his farm that he needs to go meet some unnamed brothers and sisters up until this point to go set up. Where did Joey go? Did Joey go to L.A. or Frasier going to Seattle or back?
I hate Friends, so I can't answer one of those.
So it does feel like kind of set up for something different, but it also brings to mind, I don't read fantasy books, but it brought to mind the Patrick Rothfuss. I'm like, I should really Google to see if there is any word yet on Patrick Rothfuss finally finishing that trilogy of books, but I know the answer without Googling it.
No, the answer will always be no. I literally just saw the other day, someone wrote like the 7th book in their 7-book fantasy series, and the dedication to the book was to George R.R. Martin. See, you can finish a series. It's not that hard. And I want to buy that book purely for that dedication. Once the girls get into Sheriam's study, Egwene shows something that I don't think she would have been capable of a book ago, right? In The Shadow Rising, there were several Egwene and Nynaeve scenes where they met in Teleron-Riode, and Egwene kind of was struggling with how much she could push back against Nynaeve versus how much she still deferred to the wisdom. That is entirely gone now. Egwene chews out Nynaeve to her face, and Nynaeve's response is like, yeah, I was in the wrong. That dynamic is so dramatically different from where it was a book and a half ago. I think Robert Jordan so many times with the girls like gives us a resolution at the end of the book and then pulls it back by the next book to kind of keep the conflict going. It was really nice to see that Egwene kind of kept that development from last book and is still really just able to handle Nynaeve when need be.
Yes, and I would say the dynamics between these girls are and I should say women, because but like
I'm just so used to the internet where back in the day on the threads it was always the Supergirls and the Superboys. I know that is incorrect terminology. That's just how my brain categorizes them.
And so I'm looking forward to the reunion to see how these dynamics, whether they translate to real life or not, because again, it feels like this is all pretty even in the world of Teleron-Riode and with these dynamics, but I don't know that will naturally kind of translate into this, and I feel like it won't. I feel like they're being set up as, you know, these are the best of friends who are together through high school. They go to different colleges and they change just enough that the emails are nice and the messages are nice, but then the hanging out doesn't feel right anymore.
Why are you making me feel bad about the next time I go to my hometown, like 6 months before that happens? What are you doing to me, Greg? I think you are hitting that nail exactly on the head. And I just have to say, there's something really clever about Robert Jordan creating an object that allows Elayne to go into Teleron-Riode whenever she wants and allows Nynaeve to go into Teleron-Riode until she gets kicked out for not being mad anymore. And that, I think, was a really effective moment of Robert Jordan kind of creating a contrivance for him to get Nynaeve an opportunity to really kind of think over that conversation fresh with no one around her, and kind of that moment of her blaming everyone for a mistake she made in Teleron-Riode and then realizing that's what she was doing. That kind of hit me in a way that I don't know if it would have in kind of the traditional, like, Elayne calls her out and then Nynaeve gets catty about it. This was kind of the moment I felt the growth from Nynaeve more than I had in previous chapters.
And so if this were her landing spot, and I'm not guessing it is, that feels like it does kind of complete this arc. Again, that she's, whether we've called it rock bottom 4 times or 5 times, I'm not sure, but like seems to be at a moment to build herself back up. And I want to meet that Nynaeve. You alluded to this a little bit yourself. I'm kind of sick of the down on herself and down and losing in all ways Nynaeve, and I'd like to see her kind of get a win, get a W. And I don't know what that is yet, but I have hope as they head towards the magical commune of women who support each other and want to take over the world. That seems great. Like, I'm here for this book.
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing then is we are left with like, hooray, we are going to go to Saladar. And in this chapter, we get a bunch of references to Elayne and Nynaeve saying how wonderful everything in Saladar is going to be, right? At one point, they have a conversation with Amos about whether or not these Aes Sedai really will support Rand, and Elaine's response is like, there's no other logical option, right? Elida is going to be anti-Rand, they have to be pro-Rand. And then later on in the chapter, they have a brief discussion like, how are we going to be welcomed by these people? You know, we ran away from the tower, according to most people. What is this going to look like? And they kind of quickly go over their accomplishments and are like, we're going to be welcomed with open arms. We'll be heroes. And when I hear 2 19-year-olds talking about how amazing school is going to be just as soon as they get there, I am just ready for them to not be the popular girls, right? Like, this sounds like they are setting themselves up for failure. What are you anticipating when they arrive at Saladar? Are you expecting it to go the way they expect, or do you think we're going to kind of get a wrench thrown in their plans?
Well, as one might expect on my movie podcast, we've had to talk a lot about Wicked lately. And boy, did you just set up Wicked Part 1 for so yes, I think I am expecting. Here's the thing. I don't know if I have an analogy for it, but I will say they have been able to operate very freely and bend a lot of rules. And if they are folded back in with the kind of traditional structures of the Aes Sedai, they are going to be busted down very low again. And I think that's going to naturally chafe, right? Yeah. So maybe the right analogy is when, like, you're in high school and your parents go away for the weekend and you like live independently on your own and make your own choices. And I'm not even saying like you throw a party but you feed yourself and you don't burn the house down. And then the parents come back and it's like, lock it down. You don't have any of those freedoms.
You're saying your parents come back and you can no longer sleep in until 2 p.m. and so 5 in the morning isn't a good time to go to bed. I would have no idea what that would be like at age 14 or so. I don't really have too much else to say about this chapter. Honestly, we said more than I expected, and I think our discussion has convinced me this was more than placeholding, but still less than I want with 150 pages left. Any final thoughts before we kind of say the name of the podcast and let people go and read another wonderful chapter of The Fires of Heaven?
I will just say, I think I did, thoughts about this chapter aside, I think I've covered it, but I will say I'm really hitting that stretch where I'm like, all right, I need to text Tylor and see if we can get, I think it's an insensitive meme, but Dave Chappelle being like, you got any more of them episodes about a chapter we can read for that? So I'm starting to feel that kind of drive to finish it. And I think, again, we've talked every book so far about how we both have this thing where when you get to that last 150 pages in a giant fantasy book, you would just say like, I'm staying up and I'm getting this done. So that's where I'm at, and that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. I have already shared many times that I bought the new book. I'm ready to go. We were actually just trading some messages because we have to start figuring out the opening of the next book is a little tricky because it has a very, very long prologue. So that's a deep tease for you all, but know that we are planning and we are picking up and just continuing straight on. It is crazy to think about how, again, who knows when we're recording, but I'm starting a semester this week, and very soon, by midterms, we will have a new novel and a new episode, a new season of the television show, I believe, if my timing is correct. So yeah. It's exciting. It's Wheel of Time season, and we hope you all are continuing to enjoy our journey, and that you join us again next time. Where, Tylor?
Through the Glass Columns, but you should remember that it's only one chapter next week. That's chapter 50, To Teach and Learn, which you can read next time through the Glass Columns. So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, Amazon, or our wives. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, find us on Instagram or Threads by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being a part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, leave us a review wherever you are listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time on Through the Glass Columns.